Ladies and gentlemen, comrades, compañeros, it is not Joe Fortunato. You are safe for a week from the wrath of one Joe Fortunato, but it is I, Eric Cohn, his trusty usual co-host, the main host of the podcast for this week, for this episode of Blueshirt Bandwidth. And with Joe out of the country, with officials still deciding whether or not they're going to let him back in. And let's be honest, on one hand, there's a lot to think about there. On the other hand, there really shouldn't be a lot to think about there. But with officials still deciding if they're going to let him back in his stead, we have the one, the only Chip. Chip, how are you?
I am great, Eric, and thank you, Joe, for turning over the most important podcast of the year to me. I could not be more happy about that.
Yeah, what's going on, Chip? Yes, of course, we are going to get to the Panarin stuff. In normal circumstances, Joe and I would have done an emergency podcast for the Panarin trade, but he's out of the country. I was flying back from Miami today, and given that we're now recording at 5:47 p.m., might as well just go ahead and release this at the normal time. So that is what we are going to do for episode 70 of Blue Shirt Bandwidth. We'll get to the numbers and all of that first, but of course, before we get there, blueshirtbanter.com, $85 a year gets you all of your ad-free access to the New York Rangers. Tons of people on the website today, as you might imagine, with the news breaking of the Artemi Panarin trade, but there's also a whole lot of other stuff going on up until the Panarin trade piece, which of course was what people were going to the site for today. Your piece on your MTPS piece on Mika Zibanejad was just doing absolute banger numbers. So we know that there's a lot out there that you're looking for. We've got it at Blue Shirt Banter, all ad free, $85 a year gets you your ad free access to the New York Rangers. We also join at the community tier, which gets you access to the Discord, which is live and poppin' as well. You can follow us on X, follow us on Facebook. You can watch typically the podcast on YouTube. As you know, Chip's true identity, which I can neither confirm nor deny at this point, is Chris Drury or is not Chris Drury, is a closely guarded secret. So you will not be seeing the video on the podcast this week, but you will probably be back staring at my beautiful visage and Joe's ugly mug next week on the YouTube channel. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Really happy with people who are discovering us over there. Thanks for all the people who have been fighting us over there, who are coming over to the website, following us on Spotify. That's another big thing that you can do. Follow us on Spotify. Very important for us as well. And yeah, sign up, give us your money. We'll give you really great Rangers content. And you can then also join the comment section and you can ask questions. Like we put up a question thread every week for questions for this podcast. Or you can bitch and moan and whine and complain, or you can say really whatever you want, almost whatever you want. We ask you to be somewhat sane and somewhat reasonable and somewhat of a decent human being. But then again, it's a website that's run by Joe Fortunato. So there are standards, they're just not too high. They're there, they're just not too high.
They're high
Chip,
enough that they're high enough that you can ride all the rides at Disney to clear that.
yes.
If you can
Yes, you have.
clear the if your comments can clear the Disney cutoff line, you're good.
Yes, you've stepped over the low bar there. You're the best gas station sushi in Alabama.
Exactly.
Congratulations to all of that. So, as I mentioned, this is episode number 70 of Blue Shirt Bandwidth, and there are count them two, New York Rangers who have worn number 70. Chip, I have a feeling you know both of these actually. So you're aware that
Yeah.
70 is a number, and
I
you
am
are
aware that
aware
70
that
is a number.
yeah, and that I have told you that two people have worn it for the New York Rangers. And of course, the amazing thing is I think you're going to know the answer to this question, even though you didn't know who wore 61 for the Rangers. So just going to get that out of the
Sure.
way. Who wore 70 for the Rangers, Chip?
Two immortal names in Rangers history. Really just two of the best players who have ever suited up for the Rangers, which is why I know that they won number 70. Louis Domingue and Mackenzie Scott.
Louis Domingue Mr. What was it? Spicy pork
Spicy
and
pork.
broccoli
Yep.
himself. And Mackenzie Skapsky, a absolute crazy career NHL stat line. 2 games played, 2 wins, a shutout, a goals against average of 0.5, and a 978 save percentage for one Mackenzie Skapsky in what was it? That was 2014, 2015.
Yeah, something like that.
It wasn't it was 2 games against
It
was
was
it both against
Buffalo.
Buffalo?
They were both
Both
against
against the
Buffalo.
Buffalo Sabres. Yeah,
Yep. And then he never played again.
and never played in the National Hockey League again. I think on that alone, like, look, Louis Domingue, journeyman goaltender, did the true journeyman goaltender, backup goaltender thing to the
Mhm.
Rangers in that playoff series by frustrating the hell out of them because, as is tradition. And, that's great for him. And I'm really happy for Louis Domingue. I believe he is back in the AHL. He had started the season, I think, in the KHL. He's back in the AHL with the Charlotte Checkers. And good for him. We're happy for him. I think this has to be the Mackenzie Skapsky episode of Blue Shirt
100%
Bandwidth,
agree.
if not only because you rarely come off the bench in order to occupy the net on the other side of the podcasting ice from me. And, I think you've done decently enough that we can say, I don't know if it's a shutout. We'll see if you pitch a shutout in this one. We'll see how this one goes.
All right, we'll give it a shot.
We will give it a shot.
Hopefully my podcasting career goes longer than Mackenzie Skapsky's NHL career.
We we really,
It already has.
really can only hope. Really can only hope. So before we get to what you're here to hear us talk about, and including a statement from one Joe Fortunato that I have to read. So that's coming up as well. We, of course, have to get to first the podcast ombudsman report for Blue Shirt Bandwidth, episode 69. Nice. From
Giggle.
the inimitable Charlie Vidal. So we will start with Guy Who Climbed the Tower. Joe and Eric discussed the guy who climbed the tower on Netflix livestream. Last week, Alex Henold free soloed Taipei 101 live on Netflix. Taipei 101 is a 1,667-foot, 101-story skyscraper in Taipei, Taiwan. It was the world's tallest building from 2004 until the completion of the Burj Khalifa in 2009. As I said to Joe, Chip, you would have to strap me down like Alex in A Clockwork Orange in order to get me to watch that. Nothing about that is appealing to me.
Yeah, no, no. It's I would rather watch this Rangers season on repeat with my dick in a blender and a cat wandering around, possibly being able to turn the blender on and off at a whim,
Eh,
than see that.
it sounds like something that the cat would do. Andrew
Possibly.
Margolin, as mentioned on the podcast, the only Ranger to ever wear number 69 during a game was Andrew Margolin when he wore a jersey adorned with McBackup while sitting on the Rangers bench as the emergency backup goaltender after Andrei Pavlik was injured in the February 9th, 2018 win over the Calgary Flames. Margolin did not enter the game. Margolin played goalie for 4 years at Connecticut College, which plays Division III ice hockey. I only ever played inline hockey. I was a goalie when I played inline
Okay.
hockey. I have to think that being an e-bug just sounds like both amazingly awesome and terrifying at the same time because you would be coming
Yes.
into, as we have seen in these incidents with Scott Foster in Chicago in particular, and of course the name is escaping me, but the Zamboni driver
Yeah, the
for
Zamboni
the
driver in Toronto.
yeah, in Toronto, who beat the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is just like the most Toronto Maple Leafs thing
Yeah.
you could possibly imagine. It sounds like the most amazing and terrifying thing of all time because I guess maybe it's less terrifying. It's terrifying certainly in the sense of you may have to come in off the bench and actually play, right? But everybody expects that you're going to get lit up because you're just a guy who played some possibly, as is the case with Margolin, Division III college hockey.
Right.
And You may, on the other hand, end up being Scott Foster, and you may end up stopping all the shots that you see, and you may end up winning a National Hockey League game and even getting remembered like years on by Blackhawks fans in an adoring way. And the best part of that, I always thought, was this was a guy, I think he was an accountant or something like that.
Yeah, something like
Can
that.
you imagine going back into the office the next day after you just won a game for the Chicago Blackhawks? I mean, just how amazing that must have been for Scott Foster.
So I was thinking about it when you were talking about it last week. And on the one hand, yeah, it would be like, you know, going out on a date with Scarlett Johansson. What's the absolute worst thing that can happen is you say you went out, it was a bad date, and you still say you went out on a date with Scarlett Johansson. But then I saw a Jackass episode where they tied a guy into net in a cup with his cup on and had him take a shot from PK Subban.
I've seen this, yes.
And then I
That's
thought
the
maybe things
worst.
could be a lot worse. That could be
That
worse.
seems like the worst that could happen.
Yeah.
Third round picks. In trading for Carson Soucy last season and then moving him to the New York Islanders last week, the Rangers moved down 10 spots in the third round of the draft for 1 year of Carson Soucy. Based on the current standings, the Islanders' third round pick that the Rangers acquired for Soucy would be the 85th pick. The 2025 pick that the Rangers gave up was the 75th pick, which was used on goaltender Michael Pradel, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, who is playing with the Tri-City Storm of the USHL. And from Charlie here, trigger warning, some really nerdy shit. Michael Shuckers of St. Louis Uniform analyzed the NHL drafts from 1988 to 1997 to determine the relative value of draft picks based on how their careers turned out. He determined that pick 75 has a value of 164, while pick 85 has a value of 145. That 19-point drop is almost the same as the drop in value from the 15th pick to the 16th pick. That's kind of fascinating. There's a link
It's
to the paper
fascinating.
in there that you can read if you are so inclined to indulge in some really nerdy shit. The Olympic
Charlie nailed
roster
the description.
freeze. The NHL Olympic roster freeze will have begun by the time you listen to this report. It runs from Wednesday, February 4th at 3 p.m. to Sunday, February 22nd at 1:59 p.m. Eastern Time. I think everybody knew when it started because we were all counting down the moments, waiting for that Artemi Panarin trade that we will be talking about in just a moment here. Ryan Russillo, Joe mentioned how he listens to Bill Simmons' podcast, even though he does not like or follow basketball, and said that he enjoys listening to Ryan Russillo. Ryan Russillo is no longer employed by Bill Simmons or The Ringer, and as of October, his podcast is with Barstool Sports. Crypto. While discussing cryptocurrency, Eric mentioned HODL. I don't know if you know this, Chip. I don't know. Do you say it HODL or HODL? I don't know.
I do not know.
I bought a tiny bit of Bitcoin once that I think I probably still own. And yeah, I actually knew a lot of people who got into Bitcoin very, very, very early. And
Yeah.
I do have a little bit of Bitcoin FOMO. And there are two things that assuage my Bitcoin FOMO. One of them is that I know that there are people who like have lost the password to their wallets and have
Yeah.
had at various times probably millions of dollars sitting in a wallet that they cannot access and that there's no way to gain access to if you have lost the password. And the other, and I'm already now setting myself up because I'm not going to Google this while I'm talking. Charlie can put it in the next ombudsman report. There was a guy who wanted to demonstrate the viability of Bitcoin as something you could use to make normal transactions. I think paid something like 10 Bitcoin for probably more than that for two Papa John's pizzas. And I think like at its peak, he paid something like $80 million
To
for
Papa
two
John.
Papa John's pizzas, which I know I don't need to emphasize to all of you isn't even good pizza by the standard of crappy chain pizza. Like I would much rather have Pizza Hut and
Sure.
I would probably even rather have Domino's than I would Papa John's at this point, especially after the rebrand and the reboot that they did about a decade ago. So it wasn't even
Yeah.
good crappy chain pizza. But anyway, HODL or HODL stands for hold on for dear life, which that guy did not with those 10 Bitcoins. But I imagine that that Papa John pizza was holding on for dear life on his insides because that's kind of the way Papa John's pizza works.
Have you seen the Nikki Glazer roast of Tom Brady on Netflix? Where she makes fun
I
of
know
him
I
for
have.
so she makes fun of him for losing a lot in Bitcoin, and the way she makes fun of him is by saying, "Even Gronk knew that that was a bad investment." Gronk is saying there going, "Me know that not real money."
The Bible, John 3:17 actually says, quote, "Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him." That is the NRSV translation. Not that you can control effort, but you can't control talent. I would just like to point out that considering that we were talking about Alexis Lafreniere, how appropriate that Bible verse actually is, with Joe
Right.
continuing to call him his son, that God did not send the son into the world to condemn the world. I don't know about that. I seems like he may have sent Joe may have sent his son Alexis Lafreniere into the world in order to condemn the Rangers. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not a
So
biblical scholar. I'm just throwing it out there.
so after Susie was traded, I asked for a moratorium on the Rangers doling out the number 24 so we can stop with the bad spirits that surround that number because it's been bad ever since Ryan Callahan left. I'm also going to put a moratorium on Joe adopting any future New York Ranger prospects because it's just bad. It's like he's like the foster parent you don't want, the one who, beats you and locks you under the stairs.
Yeah, if he were a foster parent in this case, he would be one that would be on an episode of Law and Order SVU. That would be
Yes,
who Joe is here. Yeah, yeah. I'm
exactly.
sorry. You're getting Olivia and Elliot Stabler called to your house, Joe. They're going to be there when you get back from wherever it is that you are. Penguins Arena. The Pittsburgh Penguins play at PPG Paints Arena, not Pittsburgh Paints Arena, as Joe called it. Saddled with JT Miller, it was mentioned that the Rangers are saddled with JT Miller for 4 more seasons. Per Puckpedia, if the Rangers bought out Miller this summer, he would count against the cap for 2.9 million next season, 5.4 million during the 2027-28 and 2028-29 seasons, 2.9 million during the 2029-30 season, and then 1.9 million for the following 4 seasons until summer 2034. I will also note that I believe it is after next year, his no movement clause does transition to a limited no trade clause. So there would be an opportunity to move on from JT Miller if the Rangers really wanted to. I'm just not going to dilate on any of that right now, and in part because, as we'll note in a moment here, we really don't have all that much to talk about in terms of game action, and we're going to spend a hell of a lot more time on Panarin. We can return to the problem of JT Miller later. There will be plenty of opportunities to talk about it. The Senators' first overall pick. During a discussion of the draft lottery, it was brought up that the funniest possible scenario would be the Ottawa Senators winning the draft only to forfeit their pick. The Senators were forced to forfeit their first round pick because they failed to provide Las Vegas with Evgeny Dadonov's 10-team no trade list when they traded him to the Knights in 2021. Dadonov had signed with the Senators as an unrestricted free agent in 2020 and was permitted to list 10 teams on his no trade list. After trading for Dadonov during the 2021 offseason, the Knights attempted to trade Dadonov to the Anaheim Ducks at the 2022 deadline in exchange for, stop me if you've heard this before, the contracts of John Moore and Ryan Kessler, who would be put on LTIR to free up cap space. After the trade deadline had passed, Dadonov's agent made the Golden Knights aware of the no trade list that Dadonov had as part of his contract, and the trade was invalidated. 5 years after they forgot to mention that Dadonov had a no trade list on their trade call with the Knights, the Senators are finally facing the music by forfeiting their 2026 first round draft pick. What a bonkers frickin' story.
So sad. So sad.
And, and finally, Lafreniere generational talent. Joe said that, quote, Nobody who batters called Alexis Lafreniere a generational talent. I was able to find a few examples of Lafreniere being referred to as generational prior to the 2020 NHL draft. That includes Pete Blackburn in an October 2020 article on why he was the consensus top pick. Mike McIntyre of the Winnipeg Free Press also referred to Lafreniere as a generational talent. James Dater of SB Nation, that joke of a website, called him a generational player who could change the franchise overnight. Emily Kaplan, in her draft lottery preview, said that the only hope the Arizona Coyotes had of turning things around was winning the lottery to have, quote, a shot at drafting a generational talent. Although we can clown on Kaplan for referring to Lafreniere as generational, she was spot on that the Coyotes needed to win the lottery or otherwise import top level talent. And that concludes the podcast Ombudsman Report.
So, would you say Joe was right that nobody who matters called him a generational talent, or are we citing Kaplan as as that it's false because Kaplan matters?
I would definitely say that Kaplan matters. And while it is not included in here, and I do not have the citation for it, Phil in the Banter Slack pointed out that Jeff Merrick, had also was hyping Lafreniere a lot at the time. And in Phil's memory, at least, referred to him as generational. So I am going to look. I think there was, and I do recall that there was efforts to kind of push back, especially on the comparisons to Sidney Crosby, because
Hmm.
Lafreniere had just kind of wrecked Sidney Crosby's record with Oceanic for points, if I recall correctly. But there was some effort to push back on all of that and be like, he is not Sidney Crosby. And certainly he has not been Sidney Crosby. But even people who thought that he was going to be a great player at the time were cautioning that he was not Sidney Crosby. So I will give Joe credit in the sense that there were people who were pushing back to some extent on some of the overhyping, but undeniably, there were people, and Emily Kaplan undeniably matters, who were calling him generational, even if they were just kind of referring to the consensus, as was noted in the ombudsman report here, that Blackburn, in an article on why he was the consensus pick, referred to him as generational. So, I, people throw that term around. Like, I
Yeah.
think people throw the term elite around as well. Like, if you're an NFL follower, there was the debate for years over whether or not Joe Flacco was an elite quarterback. People throw these terms around a little too willy-nilly, but I am going to say that it would have been very reasonable to push back at the time on the idea that Lafreniere was going to be a generational player, because most players, even taken at first overall, are not generational.
Yeah.
And even sometimes you could get somebody in the 7th round like Henrik Lundqvist, who turns out to be a generational player that you never saw coming. But I don't think you could say that no one who matters called him generational. I think that definitely was true.
So if we do the whole MythBusters thing, plausible, confirmed, busted. Joe, you're busted. You're busted.
He's busted. No, 100% he's busted. All right,
Ex-
let's get to it. So,
That's good.
right around 3 p.m. this afternoon, we are talking, of course, on Wednesday, February 4th. Uh, I'm going to say, actually, that the biggest shock of the Artemi Panarin trade announcement was the fact that I initially thought the push notification that I got from the ESPN app was wrong, because there was no way that the person who broke the trade was Adam Schefter.
Yeah,
And
that's what I was thinking.
nonetheless, Adam Schefter was the guy who broke the Artemi Panarin trade, along, of course, with Emily Kaplan, who is somebody who matters a lot.
Hmm.
Artemi Panarin traded to the Los Angeles Kings, the return being Liam Greentree, a conditional 3rd round pick that can become a second if the Kings win one playoff round. It would be the better of the 2 Kings 3rd round picks, and a conditional 4th rounder in 2028 if the Kings win 2 playoff rounds. So the reaction immediately to this on the former Bird app, a place that nobody should spend too much time, but that we suckered you, Chip, into spending more time than you probably should, was some form of outrage, disappointment, and I think in a vacuum, that is entirely understandable. And it's understandable in the sense of if you go back to a lot of the early conversations that Joe and I had been having about what an Artemi Panarin trade would, could, should look like, we were cautioning that this is a guy with a full no movement clause. And we've seen this before with guys who have full no movement clauses, that it means they can pick their destination. And when they
Yes.
can pick their destination, if they're not willing to say, I'll give you 5 teams or I'll give you 10 teams that I'm willing to go to if you really want to move me, you are going to be a little hamstrung about what you can get in return when there's only one team that you're negotiating with. Now, there was a lot of smoke out there about all kinds of different teams being in on this, and not just in the kind of done our due diligence and we checked in to see about Artemi Panarin if he would waive in order to come, but an actual sense that he would consider waiving for any one of a number of teams if they were able to work out the kind of extension that he wanted. There was news that he had preferences, of course. We had heard about Tampa, we had heard about Florida, we had heard about the LA Kings. We knew that there were preferences in all of that, but that the primary preference he had was signing an extension and that he wanted to move only once. Okay. So we had heard, in addition to Florida, Tampa, Los Angeles, San Jose, Carolina, Dallas, Washington, like even Philly and the Islanders, I think, were mentioned in all of
Yeah.
that. And,
The
you know,
entire
just
NHL.
just as a sidebar, there would have I have been very clear about this that, in the Susie trade, not just in the Chris Drury trying to do Carson Susie a solid there by keeping him local. I have no problem with trading anybody who is currently on the Rangers roster that we expect to be moved out before the trade deadline to the New York Islanders or anybody in the division or to a rival of the Rangers if that is the team giving the best possible return.
Right.
That being said, the only price that I would have been willing to accept from the New York Islanders for Artemi Panarin was Matthew Schaefer. Otherwise, they
Fair.
should have told the Islanders to go to hell. So I can only imagine if they would have worked anything out with the Islanders, considering what we saw of the actual return here, it probably would have been equally unimpressive. And we will get to the unimpressive part of this in just a moment. So the story that had all of those teams as legitimate possibilities is what opened up a lot of the conversation that we had been having over the course of the last week, where names like Michael Misa and Ryan Leonard were being thrown around as possibilities for players who could come back. Morgan Geekie from Tampa Bay as
Connor.
is it Morgan Connor
It's
Geekie?
Connor.
I wrong
Morgan's up in
wrong
Boston.
wrong Geekie.
Wrong geese.
Uh, wrong Geekie there as possibilities because it looked as if Panarin was open to a vast array of possible destinations, again, pending the ability to actually work out an extension. The reporting that we got after the trade went down was that Panarin and his team basically said to Drury and the Rangers, it's LA. That's the only place that I want to go. And I have no reason to doubt that information. I think what we now certainly know is there's plenty of reason to doubt information that we get ahead of things happening, in that
Yes.
there's only really one, maybe two insiders in all of the National Hockey League. It's like Bob McKenzie, Emily Kaplan, and that's really about it. And everybody else is just speculating. Everybody else is, and that's the nice way of saying making shit up. So I think we were misled by all of those reports. And as a result of that, had the possibility of expecting a much bigger return than the Rangers actually got for Panarin. I think that false expectation that was set up by that reporting is really the culprit for most of the frustration that I think a lot of people were feeling after the trade was announced and we found out what they got back for Panarin. If not for all of that reporting about all those different places and his willingness to be moved to a bunch of different places, I'm not saying people would have been ecstatic about Liam Greentree and 2 conditional draft picks, but I think the palpable anger would not have been there in the way that I saw it. So, the last thing I'll say, and then I will let you get in on this, Chip, is actually, I'm not even gonna say it. I am going to go ahead and read the statement here from Joe, because I think it covers the other point that I wanted to make. Here is the statement from Joe Fortunato. Quote, "While I fully admit the trade was even more underwhelming than expected, and my expectations were not very high, Greentree does have first line upside if everything goes right, is a natural goal scorer the Rangers desperately need in their farm system. There are risks, obviously, with the organization's inability to develop players like Greentree, but he's not a nothing prospect. Complaints about Drury for this return are foolish. Panarin had full control of the situation. Trocheck's return is a legitimate place to crush Drury if the return is not what you want. I urge, nay beg, Rangers fans to live in reality with Drury. There are plenty of credible things to slam him on. Focus on those." I agree with the thrust of Joe's statement there. Absent his analysis of Greentree, I am not a prospect guy. I have made that abundantly clear. I'm happy to hear, and we are actually going to have a piece at Blue Shirt Banter coming out probably tomorrow with a bunch of different people who do follow prospects a lot more closely than I do, talking about what they think of Liam Greentree and this return. But I just, this is another one where I am a little sympathetic to the Drury hate here. I don't
Sure.
love this return. But I do generally agree with Joe here. I don't know what you wanted. If it actually is true what we found out after the fact, that he only wanted to go to Los Angeles, I'm sorry, any of the alternative scenarios that people have been throwing at us, I just don't see how they would have made any difference. I don't see how waiting until the trade deadline would have changed anything. And in fact, I think it could have had the possibility of lessening the return, especially
Yep.
if it was again true that he only wanted to go to Los Angeles. If they decided to hold out to see if Los Angeles, for no particular reason, since they had no competition, would up their offer, that wasn't going to happen. They might have decreased their offer. So that was also a possibility. And it wasn't gonna happen that he was gonna be re-signed, and for people who are looking at the piece that I've not mentioned yet, he signed a extension with the Kings, a $22 million 2-year extension, $11 million AAV. There have been a lot of people looking and saying that the Rangers have a ton of cap space, that Artemi Panarin is a 90 to 100 point player, that it was only for 2 years. Why not re-sign him? And I guess my point there would be, to what end? So that he can put up 90, 95 points on a team that is going to finish 11th in the Eastern Conference for the next 2 seasons because the Rangers are in the middle of a retool, which may turn into a full rebuild at this point. I don't understand what the point would have been other than saying that this is a guy that I really like, that I would have liked to have watched for a couple more seasons. Liam Greentree may not turn out to be the kind of guy the Rangers need, but he might. And for the people saying things like, as somebody said to me, that Panarin is going to put up more points next year than Greentree is going to have minutes on the Rangers over the course of that 2-year contract. You may very well be right, but Greentree can still be on the Rangers in 7 years from now, and Artemi Panarin is going to be retired. So there was no point in keeping him past the deadline. You were just going to let him walk in free agency, and you were going to get nothing for him because they weren't going to resign him. I don't think not announcing the rebuild or the retool would have made any difference to that. They would have
Yeah.
been doing the same exact thing, even if they didn't announce it. And yet all of you would have been probably many of you would have been just as insane about the fact that you wouldn't know what they were doing. You wouldn't know that they were retooling. You wouldn't know that they were going to start changing things. And I don't think that announcing they had no intention to resign him made any difference either. I don't think any of this stuff mattered. This
Well,
was written in the stars the moment that Artemi Panarin said, I will only go to Los Angeles. Okay, I'm done. Go ahead.
I think you and Joe are both spot on, and you know how much that hurts me to say. Um, Look, am I underwhelmed by the return? Yes. And last year, Brad Marchand, same situation, got a conditional second round pick for Boston from Florida. When Patrick Kane, similar situation, came to the Rangers, it was for a second round pick and an AHL journeyman, Andy Walensky. So was I hoping that Panarin was open to going to a bunch of different places? Yes, I was, because then you could realistically see a player, a prospect, and a first come back. He wasn't. He was driving this bus. He was driving this bus from the start. In fact, he was driving this bus from the moment he turned down the Rangers extension offer that was reported earlier this season. That was the same structure as what he ended up signing with LA. He did not want to be here any more than the end of this year anyway. I think it was Vince had to call him out that the Rangers offered him an Anze Kopitar type contract, big money, short term. His camp turned it down. What did he end up signing for? Big money, short term, with LA. He wanted to go to LA. That's his right. That's his, you know, that was his contractual right. God bless. May he go out there and help them actually get into the playoffs and win a round.
And aren't you all glad? I think you should be that he turned it down. Like,
Yes.
back to my point. What would be the point of having him at that deal for 2 years to put
Right.
up 90 points on a bad team? I don't get it.
None. And I will say that I am not a huge Green Tree fan. Just based on what I read, I don't know. I'm reading other people's writing. It's nothing that I do to research a prospect or anything like that. Um, but for a lot of the reasons that Joe put in his statement, I agree. I have concerns about Greentree, but he's still a legit prospect. He's the best prospect in LA's system. That's a good thing. And I'm glad I won't have to see him with Tampa. I'm glad I won't have to see him with Florida. And
There's
I'm
that.
really fucking glad I will not have to see him hug Tom Wilson with the Capitals ever, because that would have disgusted me and made me throw up all over the place seeing him celebrate with Tom Wilson. So good luck to Panarin out in LA.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a tough marriage for them out there because, especially when Kopitar retires at the end of this year, they don't have any centers. Um, they've got Byfield, who LA fans, if you read social media, LA fans feel about Byfield the way Ranger fans feel about Lafreniere. So, you know, and then they've got Alex Turcotte, who is only slightly less healthy than Phil Hedel. Um, so, good luck to him. I think he'll do great things passing the puck to Adrian Kempe, but I don't
Yeah.
see this as being the move that they're on the periphery of the playoffs right now. I think they were a point out of the second wild card spot. I want them to get in. I want them to win around and make that third round pick the second round pick, but I don't think Panarin helps them do it. So, okay, I'll take Liam Greentree. You know, uh, best case scenario, I think he becomes like an Anthony Mantha type, which isn't a bad player. Worst case scenario, I think he's Jesse Puljujärvi, which is a problem. Um, so we'll see how it plays out.
For what it's worth, Scott Wheeler at The Athletic seems to like him quite a bit. The biggest
Mhm.
concern that I see is that he is a below average skater.
Right.
Now, again, I am not an expert on prospects, and I know that the LA Kings prospect system is not the greatest. It is one of the worst in the league, and now without Graintree is probably the worst in the league. I don't know that they had anybody else that was going to be a better option. So for people who are saying is that like, well, they just got another below average skater. Doesn't Chris Drury love those kinds of players? it was, again, Green Tree on average, evaluated as a full package, was probably the best that they were going to get from LA. Again, with LA being the only place that they could get anything from. To your point, or what you were saying there, as of right now, when we are recording, the Kings have 60 points. They're 23, 17, and 14. Wow. 23,
Wow,
17,
there
and
you go.
14 for 60 points. They are a point behind the Seattle Kraken, 2 points behind the Utah Mammoth for the wild card spots, and they are 3 points behind the Anaheim Ducks for the third spot in the Pacific. They're only 4 points behind the Vegas Golden Knights, and the points percentage is not wildly different. The points percentage for Vegas is 582. For the Kings, it is 556. So they could get into the playoffs and they could probably end up exactly where they've been before, which is losing in the first round to the Edmonton Oilers. Although the Edmonton Oilers goaltending situation is such that there are absolutely no guarantees what will happen in any given game or any given series with Tristan frickin' Jarry or some combination of what is it, Connor Ingram, the Calvin Pickard got put on waivers.
Yeah.
It is a disaster still in net in Edmonton. So I don't know. Who knows? We may see something more positive come from those conditional picks. We will have to wait and see for all of that. Um, as we noted before, if you are a subscriber to Blue Shirt Banter, you can ask us questions at the podcast question thread that we put up every week. I want to acknowledge Kyle Schnitzer, regular question asker, Kyle Schnitzer. Thank you so much, Kyle. You asked why not wait until after the Olympic break if this was the return you were getting for Panarin. Was there any word that he wouldn't have signed the same 2 by 11 deal with the Rangers? We've kind of already answered that. I think you lose leverage, and there's the possibility that the return you get from LA is worse if you wait until right up to the trade deadline. Because the only way you're getting more out of LA is if there's somebody that they are competing against. And if you're saying too that like, well, hold on to him and maybe he changes his mind and decides he's open to other places. I don't know why he would. And wishing and hoping is not a strategy. And hoping that you might be able to persuade him to go someplace else is not a strategy. It seems to me that as bad as we know the information flow is in the NHL, he probably said from the beginning, unless there's a team that is willing to give me like 5 by 12 or something
Yeah.
like that. I'll waive for whatever team is willing to give me 5 by 12. My guess is probably that there was nobody willing to do the number of years that he was looking for. And in that circumstance, he just defaulted to the one place that he really wanted to go, which was Los Angeles. So I think that's why we end up here. I don't think holding on to him until the deadline really would have done anything other than risk the possibility of one of two things happening, the return being less, or the whole thing falling apart, which would have been even worse because then he would have played out the rest of this meaningless season and they would have lost him in the offseason for nothing when he walked and he signed somewhere. And back to you had made this point too, Chip, about any word that he wouldn't have signed the same 2 by 11. Maybe that was what they offered him, but I think at this point we can just kind of assume that he didn't want that deal at the beginning of the year. And as I said, you should be glad that he didn't want that deal because I just don't get why you would want, other than, look, we should say this and we can move off of the Panarin conversation perhaps by doing what we now officially need to do. We are going to have some retrospective pieces coming at Blue Shirt Banter about the Artemi Panarin years with the New York Rangers. They were great for the
We
most
were.
part. They were wonderful. Artemi Panarin, as we have noted previously, is arguably the best free agent signing in New York Rangers history. He's one of the best free agent signings in National Hockey League history. He's an incredible player. We should all be grateful that we got to see him wear a Rangers sweater for as long as he did. He helped this team get to 2 Eastern Conference Finals. Those were a couple of magical seasons. They won a President's Trophy. They set a record for the best team record in franchise history when they won the President's Trophy. Artemi Panarin was a great New York Ranger, and it was
Yes, we were.
time for that chapter to come to a close. Given where the Rangers are, there just wouldn't have been any point in holding on to him for a couple more seasons, just so. And I do get this. I want you all to hear me that I really do get the if this Rangers team is going to be bad, at least I can watch Artemi Panarin do, stupid shit at the blue line on a nightly basis for the next couple of years. I entirely get where you're coming from. The problem is that right now you need to be Leninist about the Rangers. The worse, the better over the next couple of seasons, because what they need is young talent. And as we've discussed ad nauseum on this show, the only way you're bringing in that kind of potentially elite talent is by drafting and developing it yourself. Now, there are major concerns about developing those players because the Rangers' record with that is not particularly good. I will let's go here to a question from Rangers fan born after 1994. These draft picks coming up over the next couple of years are going to make or break our trajectory for the next 10 years, I feel. How confident are you going forward that we will make the right picks slash moves?
Well, it's the right question because if you look at a big reason why the Rangers are in the position they're in now, it's because Jeff Gorton had 8 first-round picks in 4 years, and Alexei Lafreniere is the only one still with the team. And none of them particularly. You wanna argue with me that Keandre Miller's a good NHL player? Okay. Is if Keandre Miller's the best you got out of those. I'm sorry, Lafreniere and Schneider are the only 2 with the team. I forgot Schneider was a first-round pick because he doesn't
Well,
actually play like one,
for now,
um, for now. But, you're talking Lias Anderson and Phil Hedl, Kravtsov, Keandre, and, Nils Lundkvist, Kakko, and then Lafreniere and, Schneider. If if Drury and his crew go through, whatever draft picks they have and have that same failure rate in the first round, it's gonna be a long time.
yeah,
It's not it is gonna be a problem. I will
yeah,
have a piece coming out soon about reasons to be optimistic about the future and why this could turn around more quickly, and a lot of it does hinge on getting at least this first round pick right.
yeah.
Um,
No, I
I
think
mean,
that's
that's just the
that's
way it is.
absolutely correct. There has also been a lot of glazing of Jeff Gorton recently, and
Yes, there
look, I
has
think
been.
there's plenty of positive things that you can say about Jeff Gorton and his term with the Rangers. His drafting and developing was not part of it, and even in the list of players that you gave there, Chip, right? Like in a sense, they were not all whiffs. Alexei Lafreniere is not what we want him or need him to be, but he is not a useless NHL player.
No.
Philip Hedl is a very good hockey player who cannot stay healthy for the life of him. He is hurt again. He is suffering from migraines. I think we all hope that that man gets the medical treatment and care that he needs, and probably gets a job in consulting or in player development or something like that with an NHL team, because I don't know that actually continuing to take the ice is it all in his best interest? And Keandre Miller is I there is a there's a distortion effect with the Carolina Hurricanes. I'm sorry. There is. They have a floor raising system.
Yeah.
It's good for that. But until that team actually progresses in the playoffs the way that they need to, I am never going to fully believe in them. As you point out, you'll never take a team with Freddie Anderson as their goaltender seriously. I completely understand that perspective. They may still not be enough even if they had a better goaltender than Freddie Anderson. We may find it out because Brandon Bussey is looks pretty
Looks
incredible. So
good.
we'll see maybe this playoff year what the Carolina Hurricanes look like. But it doesn't surprise me that Keandre Miller's floor was raised by being on a team that plays a system that raises the floor of the players and raises the floor of the team as a whole. So I think Keandre Miller is an all right player. He's probably even a good player, but I don't know if
Yep.
he would have reached that on the Rangers. And then the rest of them, as you noted, are really just not good. And the Montreal Canadiens are looking pretty good there. I think this is absolutely a reason too why it was the right move to get rid of Gordy Clark and his
Yep.
drafting team with the Rangers. That was the team that was helping to make those picks. So I just we can back off a lot of the Jeff Gorton praise. I understand that everybody who hates Chris Drury is desperate for anything other than Chris Drury, but I don't think that we need to start assigning to Jeff Gordon anything more than he was actually responsible with the team, which was good in some senses, but certainly not in the drafting and
Right.
developing. And it was the failure in the drafting and the developing that led to the place that the Rangers are in right now.
The best GM the Rangers have had in terms of drafting and developing over the last 30 years is Glenn Sather. So
Wild.
you it's outstanding, but of the 4 of them, it's Glenn Sather. When you look at the players who who made impacts for this organization in the last for not only in these Eastern Conference Finals, but in the last time the Rangers were good between the David Quinn years, and it's the guys who were drafted and developed in the Sather years, not in the Gorton years. You know, it just is what it is. And to your point about Carolina's system, yeah, you know who else looked good in Carolina's system? Brady Shea.
Yeah.
So, so if Keandre Miller is Brady Shea, fine. I'm fine flipping him.
Yeah, the
And
the the other side of the floor raising thing is it raises you to a ceiling, right? Like there is
sure,
a ceiling that we have yet to see a Carolina team bust through, and until I actually see that happen, it all it is doing is it is raising the floor, but it is not raising the ceiling of that team. So Rangers fan born after 94, to answer your question, how confident am I that going forward they're going to make the right picks and moves? Moves in terms of like trades and free agent signings, more confident than I am in the drafting. I don't know how you can look at the Rangers until they prove us otherwise and say you are confident in the drafting and developing that this team needs to do in order to be successful. So I don't have a ton of confidence there other than to say I'm I'm hopeful because they need to get it right. The only way that this team is going to improve is by getting it right. And I think the move of firing Gordy Clark and his drafting and scouting team was the first indication that they are looking at things differently, that they are taking it more seriously than they had in the past, that we're not going to have any more circumstances where they think Ryan Gropp is the fifth best forward in a draft that included Connor McDavid. We're not going to hear any
you know,
insane bullshit like that ever again. So
or
I
or
don't
that
think
they would
anybody
have
should be
taken.
confident about this. I'm not telling you that you should, but I think it behooves you at least to be hopeful and not spend your time in misery and just expecting everything to go wrong. That's the way that I'm choosing to look at it. If you don't want to do that with me, that's perfectly fine. Do it however you think is best, but that's what I'm choosing.
I think there was a report recently. Gordy Clark had said that even if they had picked first overall, they still would have taken Kako over Jack Hughes.
Yeah.
So
Insane.
and the other thing I'll say is, sometimes the draft is just voodoo, right? I mean, we talked about it earlier in this episode. Lafreniere was a consensus number one pick in that draft. He
Mhm.
was a consensus number one pick. And sometimes that's what happens. Sometimes you get the first overall pick in a year where Alexei Lafreniere is the best player on the draft board. And sometimes you get the first overall pick in a year where Sidney Crosby is the best overall
Yeah.
player on the board. Happens. It happens. It
Sometimes
happened. Didn't it? Sometimes you get Patrick Stefan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sometimes the consensus first overall pick is Alexander Daigle. Sometimes the
Yep.
consensus first overall pick is Patrick Steffen. Sometimes these guys just do not turn out to be who even the best experts in the sport think that they are going to be. So,
Right.
my because they have made the change away from Gordy Clark, I am going to choose to be hopeful about this. But to go back to Joe's statement, look, we have defended Chris Drury on this podcast, and I've written things defending Chris Drury. I'm I'm not thrilled with the return here, but I do tend to think it's probably the best that they were going to get, given what we know now that Panarin was only going to go to Los Angeles. Trocheck and Schneider. Those are the two deals that you need
Yep.
to wait and look for and see what the returns are. And if those are terrible, by all means, I will join you in the streets with the pitchforks and the torches calling for Chris Drury to be fired because that will be the only appropriate thing at that point. But I am not going to make that decision now based on a situation where a player had a full no movement clause, and decided there was only one destination that he wanted to go to. That's just what it is for me.
Yeah,
I
I am neither overwhelmed nor underwhelmed. I am perfectly whelmed by this trade. And to your point, not forget not only getting them right, but if you want to tell me there's a legitimate concern that Panarin and Susie are the only two gone, and if we get to the end of the trade deadline and Trocheck can put Schneider in a different box, if Trocheck is still here at the end of the trade deadline, I will be furious at Chris Drury for not capitalizing on that.
same, same.
Schneider, if they want to do Schneider, you know, like they like they did Keandre, that's fine. But Trocheck has to be traded while there is while it is a seller's market and there's a fevered pitch for centers.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree on that. And to the point of if you are if you are having those suspicions, hesitations now, there was the like, oh, the before the Olympic roster freeze might be a mini trade deadline. The only other deal that happened was Nick Bukestad being sent to the New Jersey Devils. So nobody else was really out there making a whole lot of transactions either. So again, I think we can just wait until the actual trade deadline to start making the actual pronouncements on all of this. I have one other thing for us to talk about. We'll answer the final questions and then we'll get out of here. I cannot think of a New York Ranger, former New York Ranger, that I despise as much as I despise Jacob Trouba. So there was this clip going around of him talking post game about how, this is he wasn't having a whole lot of fun the last couple of
Yeah.
seasons, and now he's having fun in Anaheim. Um, and I wrote something about this, tweeted something about this that I could sum up much shorter than what I actually wrote. You can go look it up if you want to see what I actually wrote there, and I'm sure I will get to most of the meat of it in a moment, but I will summarize it more succinctly for you. Here it is. Fuck you. I am so unbelievably done with Jacob Trouba. For the people who are like, well, what did you expect him to say? The way the Rangers treat him. Blah, blah, blah." I don't know. How about nothing? Like, if you're having such a good time, right? If you're having such a good time, you broke up with your old girlfriend, you're having such a good time with your new one. I don't know if I believe you when you need to constantly make pronouncements about how much better a time you're having than the last person that you dated. I don't know if that really is sending the message that you think, but the idea that you weren't having fun the last couple of seasons, and again, I think it's important to actually pay attention to the words he actually said there. Not that he hated how it ended, not that he didn't like that Chris Drury wanted to send him to a different team in the offseason, that he didn't like the way that all of that went down. That is not what he said. He said he wasn't having a lot of fun the last few seasons. Those seasons, I will note for you, include ones where the team set a record for the best team record in franchise history. They won a President's Trophy. They twice went to the Eastern Conference Final. I don't know what you want, right? I just am absolutely bewildered by the bitterness of this absolute failure of a leader, supposed leader on this team. The inability that he has to accept the role that he played in the unraveling the Rangers went through. So, as other people have pointed out too, you know, it he didn't have a full no movement clause.
Right.
He only had a limited no trade clause, and when he found out that a team that was not on his no trade list was going to trade for him, he had it leaked that he wouldn't report, caused a whole bunch of a shit show, and then ended up now look, for the last time, I will say this. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, other than because this is going around and because Jacob Trouba can't shut up about it. I'm not going to shut up about it for at least one more episode of this podcast. If he was unable to put what happened in the offseason behind him, bitch, accept the trade or
Yes.
do what you eventually did and say, I'll accept one here, work it out, and I'm gone. But like, that is the problem that I have always had with Truba from that moment on was that he was unable to put it behind him, but also didn't want to leave. And you gotta pick one. You gotta make a decision there. And just again to emphasize for everybody, Jacob Trouba was not performing up to the level that they needed him to perform. And you can go back and you can watch some of those goals that they gave up against the Florida Panthers. His inability to play defense. There were people saying it was like, oh, well, now he's finally being deployed correctly and all of that. Fine, whatever. I'm sure that
Bullshit.
that's probably the case. I don't give a flying fuck about any of that. It was him and his attitude and the way he handled all of it. He is a failure of a leader. He cannot accept that he failed as a leader. I'm glad he's happy with his new beautiful girlfriend, and I wish he would shut up about the girl that he used to date and move on with his life so that we can all move on with ours. Now, I know that that's Joe's position, that we should just stop talking about it. I had to get that out there, but I'll leave it at that and let you add anything you want before we answer some questions and get out of here.
I think I think Jacob Trouba is a beautiful human being and a really good guy. And here's why. You look you look anywhere in the news today and you see the cost of housing and the housing market. And Jacob Trouba does not have to do this, but what he is doing is he is providing all of the Rangers rent-free space in his head so that they don't have to suffer through the housing crisis. Look, you know, Trouba, people got on Trouba from the minute he got here, and I always defended him because I always said it's not his fault. Jeff Gorton gave him a terrible contract that he could not live up to. Right? He was a fine second, third pair defenseman who was being paid to be a top pair defenseman. That's not his fault. No one's turning that down if it's put in front of him. But also, Chris Drury didn't do him wrong. He tried his best to first send him to a place he thought he wanted to go, which was Detroit. And then he said, "You know what? I'm not going to throw a hand grenade in my clubhouse." He was relying on Trouba to come in and actually be a professional, which Trouba was clearly incapable of doing. And yes, I'm glad he is out there riding the Matterhorn for free, out in Disneyland. And I'm sure that the weather is nice and all that good stuff, and that he is having a wonderful time in Anaheim. Great. Shut the fuck up about the Rangers. You don't need to be playing circus music when the Rangers come to town in the Ducks locker room. You know, grow up and get over it. And you know what? Who could be the only other contender for least favorite would be Donald Brashear, and that asshole came to the Rangers after nearly maiming Blair Betts. So,
Well, and on top of
Trouba
that,
can shut up.
one of the one of the only real defenses that I saw of Jacob Trouba was that, like, oh, he did some good things. Like he gave Sidney Crosby a concussion in that one playoff
Yeah,
series. All
yeah,
right, good. But if that's
yeah.
what you're falling back on, you have fun with that.
I, I do want to touch on one thing, and that's it relates to both Trouba and Panarin. There's been a lot of, and this is why guys can't get no movement clauses in contracts going forward. And I've seen that in a lot of places. Drury can't give no movement clauses in contracts going forward. And I agree with the sentiment, but you're not understanding the reality of the NHL,
hmm
if that's your take.
There's
Because
a there's a
if
collective
you give
action
a
problem there.
well, yes, but if you're Chris Drury, and let's say uh Kap- April Kaprizov was a free agent, and we backed up all these guys got to free agency, and he signed Kaprizov to a 6 year a 6 year deal, max term deal with a no movement clause. Chris Drury does not care how that contract ends, because one of two things is going to happen: either he's going to win, and nobody's going to care about the back end of the contract, or he's going to lose, and the back end of the contract is a different GM's problem to deal with. You look at what Bill Zito did in Florida. He assigned all of these guys to no movement clauses for long term, and they're all in their mid to late 30s. Bill Zito doesn't care how those contracts end. He just doesn't. He's gonna be in a cabin fishing with his, with his plaque up in the Hockey Hall of Fame for winning 2 in a row. He was going through for a three-peat. He's trying to build a dynasty. He could give a shit how the contracts end. It'd be someone else's problem. That's how GMs think. When they're giving out a long-term contract, it's, "I'm doing what it takes to get the player in. How it ends, someone else's problem."
Let's answer some questions and then we will get out of here.
Yeah,
Czar Igor 23. If Team USA doesn't win gold or doesn't even medal, will you guys finally admit Mike Sullivan is not a good coach, or will you continue to defend him like he's Scotty Bowman? I admit I was wrong thinking he was good. Penguins fans that I know were celebrating him leaving. Eric Carlson and Malkin were two of them. Um, I think that that is absolutely preposterous.
yeah,
This goes back to the. It's no different than me to the people that were saying that they could judge how good Adam Fox was based on a meaningless, short, in-season exhibition tournament. That is not what you're judging these players on. Not to mention the fact that, and kind of correlated to that, Bill Guerin has given him a kind of island of misfit toys in choosing, I don't know, guys like Vincent Trocheck and JT Miller over guys like Jason Robertson, who are actually much better hockey players. And so if you're saying, despite getting that island of misfit toys, despite getting some dysfunctional players, despite not taking the best players that were actually available, in a tournament where they could have taken all of the best players from the United States that were available, that's what you're going to use to determine whether or not Mike Sullivan is a good coach, is galaxy brain shit. Galaxy brain shit. Now, Mike Sullivan, maybe I have never said that he is Scotty Bowman. I have said that
right.
he is easily one of the top 3 coaches in the National Hockey League. I think you can credit him in many ways for getting a lot of those Pittsburgh Penguins teams, while they did not win playoff rounds, getting them into the playoffs in the first place. Those were also not very well assembled hockey teams, but he at least had the benefit of having them over an entire season and was let down repeatedly, as the Rangers saw in person and Ranger fans saw in person, by failures in goal that really, other than the GM doing something about, is not really anything that he could have done anything about. So, no, I don't think that that is a evaluative metric that you can or should use at all. Not even close.
The I would recommend going back and watching the game. I forget who it was against, but it was the game where Matthew Robertson scores the overtime game winner. It was recent, and go back and listen to Sullivan talk post game about the young players on the team and putting them in the roles they put them in and why he's put them in there. And it was a clinic on, you know I want to give young players more responsibility so that they start to learn without being thrown into the deep end of the pool and this and that. And he just went on for about 5 minutes, and I'm sitting there going, Jesus Christ, this is what coaching looks like. This is what coaching looks like. And yeah, I have my problems with him, you know, deploying Connor Sherry the way he did, and probably will when Sherry comes back off IR.
Well, I
But
mean, I
this
don't
is
know
what
what's gonna be left when Sherry comes back
yeah,
off
right.
IR, so I think the outrage about that will be tamped down for
Yeah.
those reasons alone.
But this is what good coaching looks like. And yeah, I mean, everything looks better when you have Sidney Crosby and Geno Malkin, you know, doing things for you. But this is what coaching looks like, and he is doing a good job with the kids who are here. He's giving them more responsibility. He's working them in ways um, that we wouldn't have seen with previous Rangers coaches. And oh, by the way, he's getting Mika Zibanejad to play like the player who earned that contract
Yeah,
all those years ago.
yeah.
So
No,
no, I will not. I will not say that Bill Guerin fucking up and putting together a roster that would barely, I think, should barely compete for bronze is a reflection on Mike Sullivan's coaching ability.
Mike Sullivan alone, right? So like
Yeah,
I'm if they win the bronze medal, then we should definitely come back here and have a conversation then. Like, if that's the case, right? If they finish and they win a bronze medal, I don't think anybody's expecting them to win the gold medal. If they
right.
finish and they win a bronze medal, like, what are we saying about Mike Sullivan then, right? Does he get credit for that, or can he only possibly get blame? I If you're going to evaluate him, let's use the NHL. Let's use his time with the Rangers. Like, it's, because we have constantly referenced movies on this podcast, and I typically have to explain them to Joe, and I know I don't have to do that with you, Chip.
Yeah,
Uh, there's a really great, I may have brought it up before, Samuel L. Jackson, Kevin Spacey, really great in the sense that it's not a great movie, but it's a fun movie called The Negotiator, where Samuel
love
L.
that movie.
Jackson takes
It's a great
hostages. He's
cast.
a hostage negotiator. He takes hostages of his own. And they bring in Kevin Spacey as another hostage negotiator to help talk him down. And shortly after Spacey gets there, they try to breach the building and they try to, neutralize him and rescue the hostages. And when Spacey comes back, he was in the building at the time when they tried this breach. And he comes back down. It's like, well, we don't think this man can be talked down. And his answer is, I've been here 5 minutes. How do you know that? Sullivan has been here a half a season that has certainly not played out the way that anybody hoped or thought that it was going to, and is now entering a rebuild, retool process. Can we pump the brakes on this
Yeah,
just a little bit? And if not only to just offer it from evaluation from the perspective of, again, compared to what? I don't know that there's an obvious person that, we did try the guy who was supposed to know how to develop young players because he was a college coach for a retool or rebuild. And how did that work out? Now, I will give you a knock on Mike Sullivan in that I never loved that David Quinn was on this team. I do not love
no,
that he is here now. I wish he was not here. But, this is not David Quinn. And I don't know that anybody else is all that great that is possibly out there, but use the NHL as the
and
evaluative
also
metric for this, please, not the
and
Olympics.
also with what the Rangers are going through now, like Chris Drury could not do this last year with Peter Laviolette because they didn't have a relationship, they didn't trust each other, they didn't talk to each other. In this rebuild, retool, whatever you want to call it, whatever spin you want to put on it, I am sure that Mike Sullivan is in Drury's ear as to which players stay, which players go, and what he wants to be brought in so that he can be successful moving forward with the team. That's why the long-term contract was so important for Sullivan. That's why the extension for Drury made sense. I truly think that this is the most symbiotic relationship that Drury's ever had with a coach, and hopefully that is paying dividends in terms of shaping the roster for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Cronus. I'm going to read the second part of this question first because the second part is not a question and it is just gold. Last week, in response to a user question, you agreed that the Rangers fans, with the user, that Rangers fans should spend this winter drinking heavily. Maybe we should start giving out suggestions. So, on that note, here's one from me: a variation on one of my favorites, a Black Manhattan, adding extra darkness sourced from the mood of us fans in and around Madison Square Garden. It's a more earthy flavored Manhattan and is delicious. Here's one recipe: 2 ounces of rye whiskey, 1 ounce Averna Amaro, and earthy Amaro will work. 1 dash Angostura bitters, 1 dash orange bitters such as Regan's. Garnish with a brandied cherry. That sounds delightful. I hope you all
It
go out
does.
there and make it. The question
Drink
itself.
responsibly.
The letter has been out for a couple of weeks and only Susie has been traded. Of course, now Panarin added to that. This question was posted hours ago. Do you think Drury and other GMs are waiting until the Olympic break to focus on negotiations, or is it something else? I really, the idea that there was going to be a midi deadline obviously proved not to be true. I think the deadline is the deadline. You're going to have a bit of a rush to it, but I don't think there was a lot of looking to move players, especially right before they're about to go over, because a lot of the players that, or some of the
Yeah.
players that we're talking about are players who are going to be on Olympic teams wanting to do a lot of that business before the Olympics. Panarin was not a guy who was going because Russia is not participating in the Olympics. So that wasn't a particular concern with this particular deal. And as I noted, the only other trade that happened was Nick Bjugstad being traded from the St. Louis Blues to the New Jersey Devils. So looks like the trade deadline is still the trade deadline. I think that's just what it is. I think that's just what it's going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I think that for higher profile players, or even not high profile players, the Olympians who are on rosters, it would have been it, it would have been very difficult for a GM to uproot a player's life and have them have to figure all this stuff out about relocating and all that while they're also on planes to Milan soon.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it makes more sense to wait. Um, but yeah, I think Cronus is right that a lot of the convers this is a nice long break that a lot of these conversations can happen with GMs. So I think while the deadline is still going to be the deadline, I wouldn't be shocked to see a flurry of activity earlier. I know there's not a lot of space between when trades reopen and when the deadline hits, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's not everybody waiting right up until the deadline to make trades. I think there'll be a lot of things that are culminated on paper and just filed as soon as possible because with the with the standings being what they are in both the East and the West, these teams need every player that they can get for every game that they can get. And so if you can swing a deal over these next 2 weeks to have, Vincent Trocheck join your Minnesota Wild team coming out of the break, you'd rather have that than wait a couple of days and maybe lose some space in the standings. Um, yeah. So you want to swing the deals as quick as possible once you come out of the break.
And as I understand it, there is a roster freeze. This does not prohibit GMs from talking with one another
No,
about what they
it's
may
just
be doing when the
right.
deadline actually hits. So it's not as if, there's a absolute moratorium on all conversations and then once everybody gets back from Milan and the roster unfreezes, then it's just an absolute dash to the trade deadline. It's not quite that. So, all right, we got one more. Ye old scribe. What are your guys' predictions for medals at the Olympics? I think you would have to say that Canada is the favorite. The
Yep.
big question mark with Canada is it looks like they are going to start statistically the worst goaltender in the National Hockey League this season in Jordan Binnington as their goaltender in Milan. Now, the flip side to that is he wasn't having a great year last year either, and he played absolutely out of his mind in the Four Nations tournament. Now, that was a lot shorter. And if he comes out in the beginning of the round robin and looks as bad with Team Canada as he has looked with the St. Louis Blues, they have other options that they can go to, which will almost certainly be better for them than Jordan Bennington is going to be. But I still think you have to say that a team that has a line of, dear God, Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, and Nathan McKinnon, that's your favorite to win a gold medal at the Olympics. Silver, I guess I would say probably Sweden. Sweden is always a contender in these. And you know what? I am just almost, if out of nothing but spite, I am going to say that Team USA is going to win a bronze medal just because that would bring me some enjoyment based on some other things that we've talked about earlier. That's my answer.
I'm going to say Sweden wins gold because I don't want to see um, I don't want to see Tom Wilson celebrate anything. Really, to be honest with you. And I agree with you about Binnington. I think Binnington will be better not playing in front of the Saint or playing behind the St. Louis defense. Uh, I think I think Sweden takes gold. Let Mika celebrate a gold medal. Get the gold medal to go along with the outdoor game uh, trophy that he got. Give Canada the silver. Give Finland the bronze. USA does not matter.
I like it. The Buckley School of Prognostication. You only predict the things that you wish to have occur. I understand it. I appreciate it. And I support it.
Excellent.
That is it for the podcast this week. Next week, Joe, we imagine, will be back. I don't know. We'll see. We'll find out. Maybe they don't let him back into the country. I think we would all understand if they didn't let him back into the country. But we'll see if he
Fair,
is back
fair, fair point.
after that. Chip, any final words before we get out of here?
Just like you said, and like Joe said, pound Drury for what he did. There's enough shit to be angry at Chris Drury for what he has done. We do not need to make up stuff to be aggrieved about.
Yeah, which again, we have we've talked about it some on this episode. Joe and I have talked about it in recent episodes too. Joe has made the point constantly. It's like there are reasonable things to assail him for. Pick those, not the things that are unreasonable, and we will see. So we're gonna. Joe and I have some conversations to have about what we're going to do with the podcast over the next couple of weeks because, of course, we're only going to have Olympics to talk about and no idea what that's actually going to look like. So we will let you know on what is coming up. We're working on some guests as well. More information on that to follow. So stay tuned. Once again, blueshirtbanter.com, $85 a year gets you all of your ad-free access to the New York Rangers. We got a ton of content that is coming for you. We are going to be covering the Olympics. We're going to have some really great retrospective stuff looking back on Artemi Panarin's time with the New York Rangers. Chip, you mentioned the piece that you have coming up on why you should be hopeful about what is going to come from this retool, rebuild. Because Feldman has been working on this 5-year plan, what an actual 5-year rebuild process for the Rangers would look like to get them back to being a playoff team that could contend. I think tomorrow we should have a piece up that is going to look at opinions on Liam Greentree, what the Rangers got back for Panarin. A lot that is there. You're going to want to check it out. $85 a year will get you all of your ad-free access to the Rangers at blueshirtbanter.com. We will see you back next week. Bye for now.